we actually realized that there were a lot of people who came with Addisonian crisis in the casualty, and there were people who were taking steroids on their own and suddenly stopped it due to a small fever, and nobody was there to top up their steroid. Or these people had come with bad osteoporotic fractures. And we picked up in a small study done in the hospital showed there were a large number of people who were abusing steroids. And then Sharon, my colleague who was in community health, did a community-based study. And then we documented there's a huge problem in our place. And then based on that study, we were able to write in the print media and in the electronic media about steroid misuse. And we've been like advocates done about how we need to be careful in giving steroids. And we called in many of these quacks, as you would like to call them. But these are all traditional practitioners, and we told them the dangers of steroid misuse. And so that has led to a ripple effect. And many people became aware of the problems of glucocorticoid misuse, and that became a couple of papers in the years later. So these were the four, I would say, the areas which I remember very strongly. And today when I look back 10 years down the line, I would say, no, that is good. That's a part of our job. In Proverbs 31:8, it says, speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves. Be the voice of the oppressed. And I think this is a silent suffering group, people who are on steroids consistently and not even knowing it's dangerous, and then end up in problems and die. And we can be the voices. That's what God wants us to be a voice for those who cannot speak up for themselves.
That was Dr. Philip Finney. He is an endocrinologist and one of the country's finest teachers of clinical medicine. I'm your host Abhi, and come, let's listen to him as he talks about his experiences in rural Bihar.
Hello everyone, welcome back to our channel. Today we have a very special guest with us. He's an endocrinologist. He's an excellent physician. I should say that he is one of the person who inspired to make me do medicine. So please welcome Dr. Philip Finney. Thank you, sir, for joining us. It's a privilege to have you in our channel.
Hi Abhi, thank you for having me on this chat show, and I hope that will be a good time together.
Sir, if you remember, I came to Raxol when I was an undergrad student, and one of the things I really liked when I came to Raxol was how you got to a diagnosis and how you had taken care of the patients in Raxol. So that actually inspired me to do medicine. And so can you tell me, sir, how did you choose to be a physician in a rural place? How did life in college actually help you to do that?
Yeah, thank you, Abhi, for a question. Actually, I vividly remember your batch. There were about 5 of you, I think, who came for that secondary hospital program posting to Roxol. And it was only about 1 or 2 years probably since I had joined the Duncan Hospital at Roxol. And it was a very good visit. And in fact, before your group of students came from Velo, the entire team, all of us planned how we should structure your 2 weeks there. And I think all of you had rotations in all the major specialties. But what I would say is, I think the decision to come to Roxol for me as an endocrinologist was made many years ago, actually. When I was in the Christian Medical College in Velo, I think that time we had a lot of seeds were sown in our heart about considering being missionaries as doctors who work in the underserved parts of our country as part of the calling which we have as Christians. And very often I used to hear some of our seniors and doctors telling us, we are not doctors who happen to be Christians. We are actually Christians, followers of Christ, who happen to be doctors. And so that's a very important thinking, mindset change, which is needed if we have to consider wanting to serve God, because primarily we are ambassadors for the Lord, and we have to be located in places where the gospel relatively is unreached. What, as Paul says, I would rather be available, where the gospel has not been preached. And so I think my Christian faith definitely was the major influence in my choosing to be located in Bihar, because I knew Bihar and Orissa and Chhattisgarh and all these areas are where the gospel is less heard. And they're using our medical skills and training the best possible way, also was a secondary outcome. So that's how I decided to choose to come there. And then there were, of course, a good fellowship we had in CMC Vellore. There was this Evangelical Union, the EU group, which used to meet every week. And for me personally, those times of fellowship, not only on Sunday evenings for Bible study, but more so in the times of intercessory prayers we used to have in the college chapel every Friday, was very important to form strong bonds between a few of us who were regularly meeting for fellowship. And I think those times, I think, are the origin or the source of inspiration which I got to probably consider going to a mission field at a later point in time. Thereafter, I think, having been sponsored by the Emmanuel Hospital Association for my undergraduate training, I had an opportunity to see the work happening in Jharkhand and Assam for 1 year each after my MBBS times, which showed me that there were large swathes of areas in our country where there is no qualified doctor. And I think that just seemed to be a logical reason why I would have spend my life in areas where the gospel is not being heard, and then use my skills and training to be a strength for the efforts we have to make sure the gospel is good news is heard in those parts of our country. And that's how I think I was influenced a great deal. And of course, when I was doing my undergraduate service obligation in Jharkhand, there were a few missionary doctors who worked with us in Bihar who had left UK and come and serve for many years in Jharkhand, which really touched my heart. And I said, when I had my personal times with the Lord, why not our own people, going and serving in these areas, not depending on people from overseas to come. And I think later on working in Assam as well really opened my eyes to the needs of the tribal parts of our country, particularly in southern Assam, where I worked in Mukunda, was an eye-opener in many ways. I think it is a multiple influences over this period, from my parents, my childhood experiences. The times in Vellore was very important, I think, to solidify that decision. And thereafter working in Odanchatram after my MD training and meeting many stalwarts of people there who have stimulated many young people to go forth into the mission field in North India was also a further encouragement. So before I went and did endocrinology in Vellore, much before that itself, sort of my wife and I had said, Lord, if you give us a chance, we want to go and serve in some part of the country where the gospel is not heard. We will use our specialization to the best possible way, whichever way it will fit in. But primarily, we want to be located in such an area. So that's to cut short a long story, but I'm sure I can expand on it as we go on.
Thank you for sharing that, sir. So as you had said, you did 2 years of your undergraduate bond in different parts of India. After that, how did you decide to do a postgraduate course in medicine? What was your thought process during that decision-making process? What influenced you, sir, to take up medicine?
So actually, when I finished my MBBS, or I was finishing my MBBS training at CMC Vellore, actually I was very taken up by surgery, and I thought probably I should become a surgeon because it was probably very flashy, nice, and it really, I used to be awestruck seeing the way the surgeons used to operate. And then when I went to the mission field, the general refrain I heard from many people is, you can always be a surgeon and do general medicine, or you can manage the medical work. And many of the mission hospitals which are successful always had a surgeon at the helm, because he could do surgery, obstetrics and gynecology, and medicine also to a great extent. Whereas if you end up as a physician, you will be really handicapped, and especially to run a hospital, mission hospital successfully, it may not work. That is the general thinking in the mid-90s, I remember. And so not many people in our organization in EHA were being encouraged to probably go and do medicine. Everybody was being encouraged to do either surgery or obstetrics and gynecology. In fact, I remember one of our senior colleagues told me, consider surgery or OG as the option. And actually, during my undergraduate service obligation in Sadbarua in Navjeevan Hospital, one of the EHA hospitals in Jharkhand, I did so much of general surgery and obstetrics and gynecology under supervision of my seniors that I really liked it. But after doing 1 year of surgery, I realized I was getting a little bored, in inverted commas. Bored, why am I saying the word bored is, I knew it as the same thing, doing it over and again. And after some time, I was not getting the pleasure or the passion to continue to do that. And I really found it more I found my thought process more tickled by when I could not diagnose some of our patients with cerebral malaria. We used to have a lot of people with cerebral malaria in Jharkhand. And when somebody is given quinine and all the drugs, and still after 2 days he's not waking up, I'm really at a loss. I don't know what to do. I felt helpless. I didn't really know how to analyze electrolytes. Of course, those days we didn't have an electrolyte analyzer in that hospital. But often to think through complicated process issues which we were facing with our medical patients was more of a challenge to me. And I was not enjoying surgery all the more, but that was a need. So I used to be doing surgery. I've done more than 40 or 50 cesareans in that hospital, but and many general surgeries under supervision. But that didn't give me the joy which I was getting to try to solve a difficult problem in medicine. And so actually the second half of my service obligation, the second year, I was transferred to Assam, where there was only a physician there, Dr. Sam Siddharth, who's probably known very well to all of you. He is the EMFI General Secretary. He was the only doctor there. He was struggling to manage to do obstetric cases and deliveries and cesareans because he had not had that much of exposure to surgery. And though my seniors in EHA suggested that I can go and help out Dr. Sam in Makunda. And when I was in Assam, I was the surgeon in inverted commas and the obstetrician. That was my role. So 1 year, little less than 1 year, I was doing the role of a surgeon and an obstetrician. It was very good, very rewarding. God did a lot of miracles, and we saw really hand of God in many things we did. But truly, my heart, I realized at the end of 2 years, was not in surgery. And then I realized Dr. Samek was like how AB said, he was touched by the way I came to diagnose problems. I was fascinated by the way Dr. Sam Siddharth used to pinpoint the neurological lesion just on a clinical examination, where the localization of the problem is and how to treat. And he would help oversee the way I did my neurologic examination and many other medical problems, making a problem list. So these things really caught my attention. And I realized that perhaps I think I am wired not to be a surgeon, and I'm wired to be a physician. Perhaps that will be what, though I had my apprehensions, but talking to many other seniors, actually, I decided, I felt when I prayed as well, no, God was giving me a clarity that 2 years of doing surgery, I realized that's not what I am cut out for. I can't imagine doing this my whole life. That is good for a season, but at the same time, it taught me so much. I remember my senior surgeon in Jharkhand, he used to tell me, Philip, what a beautiful plane. See, we're opening the rectus sheath. He's doing a cesarean section. He must have done 1,000 cesareans, the senior person who taught me. He was saying, now we are in the right plane. You see, we're going to enter the peritoneum. You could see the joy on his face, even though he's done it the 1,000th time. There was no boredom. And he was enjoying the tissues. And he was saying how you should hold the tissues with respect and gently. And he was not bored. And I was just saying, oh, I was getting a little stuffy inside my gown. I want to finish off the surgery. How can I finish it off? I was not really enjoying it. So I think God used that period. It was a very important period of my life. Probably the best 2 years of my life was after my MBBS, when I worked in a mission hospital where we had a lot of surgical opportunities. And that showed me that God's calling on my life was perhaps to use my professional skill sets better as a physician. And that's how I chose to do MD General Medicine and went to Vellore. And today, when I look back, I'm so glad. If I had not had those 2 years, I perhaps might have ended up as a surgeon and been a little disappointed, perhaps. But today, I so thoroughly enjoy what I do now as a physician primarily, and then endocrinology is just an extra offshoot. But it's beautiful. But I think God has made each of us so different, and we have to discover our calling in our profession also, apart from our calling as a person. So that's in short, I think, Abby, what I want to share.
Thank you, sir. That was a 180-degree turn, isn't that? Like from medicine, from surgery to medicine.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, like soon, our some of our junior doctors would be writing the NEET specialty exams. Now things are a little different. Some people may not end up choosing what they would like to. But would you like to advise or comment on how a person should decide on his postgraduate exam based on your experience?
I understand fully well that things have changed a lot. Those days we used to write the All India PG exam as well as the Vellore exam and the Ludhiana exam. And in Vellore and we could probably choose which field you wanted to go to. Here I had an opportunity, but now when you apply for NEET as a whole across the country, but still I think in Velo you can still choose which are your areas you're particularly interested in. So if you feel that God is calling you in a particular area, you can commit it to God in prayer, definitely, because God will want to use that opportunity, where your skill sets and talents are well utilized. And I think you just give your best shot, because I think this is the time when you have to prepare everything, all the subjects, right from anatomy to the basic sciences, the paraclinical subjects and the clinical subjects. You do your best, and then pray that you get a good rank where you can have an opportunity to choose the right specialty. So perhaps it may not be in the college of your choice, but if you feel you're convinced that God has called you to be a community physician, for example, then you maybe you may give those choices a little higher up, and you have to choose that. And really, God will guide you if you've committed your ways to the Lord. No, He will guide you at every step of the way. And I can say, as Dr. Selvin in the Odanchatram Church used to say, Jehovah Jireh, we say the Lord will provide, right? He says beautifully, Dr. Selvin says, the Lord who arranges things for us. And that's been my experience. The Lord will arrange things. And Don Moyen's song goes, no, he's working all the time behind the scenes. We don't even know. And when you look back a few years later, you'll realize, wow, that is how God arranged for me. Maybe you may get into MD transfusion medicine, but maybe that may be God's calling. But initially, it may be a little struggle when you're just before it. But I think if you've committed your ways to the Lord, He will work it out beautifully, is my experience. Even if it has to wait a year or two, don't hesitate, because God is doing His work in your life. Ultimately, we have to be useful for kingdom purposes, and our talents God will take and use. Most of us, God will use us according to our talents. But William Carey was not a very great um, literature person initially. He was actually a shoemaker or a cobbler, as he calls himself. But God used him, to translate the Bible into so many languages, and he became such an impact. So God can even take the little we have, the 5 loaves, and multiply it. So we don't know. We can't see the big picture now, but God can see the future ahead. So just surrender your life to the Lord and ask God, Lord, what would you have me do? Prepare for the need as though everything is at stake there. And then wait for God to work out things in such a way that you can get in a specialty of your choice if that is His will. Thank you.
Thank you for that, sir. I'm sure that is very useful for many of the junior doctors who listened. Sir, let's talk about Bihar and your experience there. A lot of us have different ideas of Bihar, and like some of us might have read books about Bihar, for example, like how Taru Zindal had written about her experiences in Bihar, about the hospitals in the government there. Uh, when you came to Raxol, how was it, sir? Can you give us a picture of how it was when you had joined?
When I heard about Bihar, I was not so worried, because in 1996-7, when I went for my undergraduate service obligation, it was then the Bihar. Now it's called Jharkhand. At the time, it was Bihar, and so I had already encountered all the fears I had 20 years prior to my going to Bihar again, or 10 years prior to going to Bihar again in 2007. When I went to Bihar, those days, the Bihar which I knew in 96 was, after you could only go in the daytime, you can travel around. Evenings, nobody traveled around because of the Naxal threat and things like that. After 6 o'clock in the evening, everybody will be back in the mission campus. But things have actually changed quite a bit for the positive. The media hype about Bihar not being probably a very good place is not no longer true. Actually, there's a lot of fear people have. But actually, the place of Bihar, actually, we grew to love over the 10, 12 years we spent there. Actually, the people are just like us who are here, the majority of them. There are a few people who show their muscles and probably are a little bit firm and probably are a little bit pushy in the way they think when they handle things. But my experience has been, on the whole, most of the people are lovely people there, and we have a lovely opportunity to work there. Much of the violence and those problems have significantly come down under the current regime of government who are there. There has been a lot more development. The roads have improved tremendously. And of course, inside the mission hospital compound, it's actually quite safe. And there is a very good community living, which we experienced. So the Bihar, which I went there, I didn't have much apprehensions, particularly because I'd heard about the Duncan Hospital at Roxall. And when I went there, it was a lovely community living we experienced for close to 8 years, when we stayed in the campus. And also during that time, the patients we came to, it was so lovely to care for them, because many of them didn't have any other option. Now I work in a medical college in Kerala, And here, if the patient doesn't want to see me, he can choose another person not very far from me to see for an endocrine or a medical opinion. But where for 100 kilometers at a stretch, if you're not there as a person with healthcare skill sets, probably patient may even die. Many of them, when we refer them to a city away, many of them take their patient home and they will die. So you're left with tremendous responsibility to care for your patient, and you have to innovate and think creatively how you can provide the best care with all the skills and training you've had. So I thought Bihar was a wonderful place where my medical training was really utilized to the best way possible and for the people who needed it the most. When I went to the government setup, I remember I was training government doctors in Bihar often for their family medicine training in Bihar. And when I used to talk to them, they used to come in batches of 10 to 15 and stay with us in the Rangsal Mission Hospital. Talking to them, many of them expressed the difficulties they faced. They wouldn't have good support systems like we have in a mission hospital for the equipment and the support, the number of personnel they need. They used to struggle, but many of them were really equipped after they spent some time with us. I remember I went to their PHC once for a CME. When I went to the PHC, I spent 1 hour ago. 1 hour earlier, I went to that place and I visited the labor room. It was very sad actually to see the PHC in Roxall, no, the labor room, the needles were lying around unsterilized, blood splattered of many parts of the labor room. Nobody has cleaned that place for days, and the quality of care which can be delivered in an environment like that, which is far from the standards which we set as a basic minimum, was not available. That helped me to understand rather than criticize them. It made me understand that this is a situation in which my colleagues are working. So how can I try to make it improve? And I remember Dr. Sharon Cynthia, who was my colleague in Roxall, she actually made a system by which she could try to improve and raise the standards of the PHC in that district. In fact, Taru Jindal worked in Motihari, the district hospital there. And today I heard that the Motihari district hospital has come up several notches in quality because of a few people who are willing to make a difference and go to these places. And there are problems in every place, but they try to make a difference, and that has helped to raise the bar. In fact, our PHC in the area around Roxall got the best model PHC award due to the efforts of Dr. Sharon, who's an alumnus from Velo, and her time she spent there building up the government systems, showing shoulder to shoulder in a spirit of partnership rather than trying to see, oh, they have faults there, faults there. That is there everywhere. But I think it's a beautiful opportunity God gives us when we locate in places like this to try to build bridges with our colleagues who work in other places. I know even now there are government doctors of Bihar who call me just for an occasional consultation because I used to be their facilitator in the PG Diploma Family Medicine programs. And even today, we have a good relationship. Many of them have gone, touched and transformed through their 10, 12 days they spent with us, with my entire team at the Duncan Hospital, because all of us really poured out ourselves into training them because we knew they are going to a much more difficult place to practice than us. But I think those genuine efforts, they were able to appreciate and they have maintained a relationship. I believe all of them also will sense the importance of why we were there, the good news we wanted to be parts of, spreading. And I think that has led to a tremendous transformation in the many government doctors across the state of Bihar. And we've really enjoyed that involvement in particular. I remember that.
So thank you. You had mentioned that if you had referred a patient, they might go back home or they might die. So obviously there was economic disparity in Bihar, right? So can you tell us more? How far was a referral center from Raxol? If you are referring a patient, how far did they have to travel to reach a place? And if at all they reach the place, and how about the healthcare system there?
When I was at the Duncan Hospital at Roxall, we were a small town there on the border of India and Nepal. Most 50% of our patients used to come across the border from Nepal, and 50% were from North Bihar. The nearest district hospital was about 50 kilometers away in Motihari, which was far less equipped than what we had facilities at Duncan. So for us, if we have to really truly refer to a higher center, it was 6 hours away at Patna by road, on roads which were not very easy to travel. I don't know whether AB, you remember when did you travel by road from Patna to Roxall? It is quite a bumpy ride. If a lady has not delivered, she will deliver on the way. That is sort of the bumpiness which used to be there. Whereas the road to Kathmandu is the nearest higher center for us in Nepal. That is also 6 hours away, and there are some windy roads up the mountain which are there. So it's actually quite difficult for people to go, and they have to spend more close to 5 to 10,000 rupees if they have to hire a vehicle to go to these places to a higher center. And even if they go to these government or private setups in many of these places in Patna or Kathmandu, we were not very certain whether they were really getting a better quality of care than what we could give here with our fairly well-equipped ICU and facilities we had. Many of the patients, they would not have that much of savings or a health insurance if you were to refer them to a higher center, because these hospitals, when they were to go, they have to plan at least for 40-50,000 rupees. At least they have to plan and go if they go to a higher center. And the per capita income in my area in Bihar and in Nepal wasn't that great. I will just give you one example. When my housemaid who worked with me in Roxol, she had a daughter's wedding, which was something which was just semi-planned. It was not so unexpected, but she didn't have really much savings, and she went to go. We asked her how she's making arrangements. She said she has taken a loan of 5,000 rupees from the local money lender. And the local money lenders are the ones who actually control the economy, I must say, in those parts of our country. They cannot go to a bank and take a loan because you have to produce so many documents. It's so complicated, the system for the average common man. So she went to the money lender, he gave her money, and he said, very simple interest system. He said, for every 100 rupees you take, you just give me 5 rupees per month as the interest. Now, I think all of us can do a simple math, right? So 100 rupees, the interest is 5 rupees per month. So let us say we take 5,000 rupees, right? So that's you multiply into 50. So 250 rupees is your interest on a principal of 5,000 rupees. So if you take 250 rupees for a month interest, you multiply it by 12 months, it is 3,000, right? So you're paying interest of 3,000 rupees per year on a principal of 5,000. Then if you take a bigger amount of money, it's really a 60% interest actually, if you calculate it per year, which you're paying for a principal amount. And she was struggling to repay this, and many of them get into bonded labor. They have to send their children for working for these powerful people. And many of the children who used to work in the local tea shops and the sweet shop and all were people who were, the families were under bonded labor, and many of them would never get out of this trap. And this is the common story of every second or third person who suddenly had an unexpected expenditure. I remember one of my senior friends, Dr. Anil Cherian, who's now working in South Sudan. Anil used to do a study where he showed that 1/3 of Indians go below the poverty line due to a sudden hospitalization or a hospital-related expenditure due to inpatient care. And so we have to be sensitive to this part. Instead of referring them and making them slaves to various people, sharks who are operating with huge interest system, we thought it is better to give the best possible care. Or somebody had a malignancy, if it was fairly advanced, I would rather encourage them to go home and die peacefully without pain and in comfort and dignity than referring them for some not a very useful radiotherapy or chemotherapy, which we know may not really make a difference. At least it'll save the family from bankruptcy. So I think it is very important to tailor our medical knowledge, use it wisely when we refer people off. So the burden of responsibility to make the decision is greater on us when we serve in such areas. We don't have to feel we're doing anything less than standard treatment. I think that in that situation, that is the best care we can offer for the patient, given the circumstances. So I think the situation, definitely people used to struggle a lot financially. No wonder many of them used to go to the local quacks. If they have a cough, a fever, nobody comes to the Duncan Hospital or the Mission Hospital. They will go to the local compounder who's well trained. He would have observed a doctor working for 3 years. I'm sure all of you can also stand with a doctor. You learn what is the drugs you give for asthma or for peptic ulcer disease. Not very difficult to learn the name of ranitidine. I remember when I was in Jharkhand, I came across a kutti booklet, a small booklet. Sorry, I'm using slangs. The booklet said how to become a doctor in 2 weeks. And it had a lovely, I flipped through it. It is written in Hindi, Bukhar jad ke saath ho jai. If you have fever with chills, likely to be malaria, urine infection, 2 things. And if you treat with anti-malarials and one antibiotic, very likely you'll get better. We don't need to know all the microbiology of the coliforms or the pseudomonas or all what we studied in MBBS. Probably you can simplify medicine also to some extent, right? And so in 2 weeks or 5 days, I don't remember the details, I came across this book. Most of the problems, back pain, you give Brufen, give Rantac. Everything is answer and question answer. So you go and get yourself, read this, practice, watch a doctor for about 2 weeks, 2 months, then you can set up your own practice. I will share pictures with you and Abby about my visiting one of the quacks and spending a half a day with him, how he did his practice in Motihari, near Motihari and Roxol. You can see he stocked himself up with steroids and so many other medications which give immediate relief for his patients. And he's got a thriving practice. He sees 100 patients a day, he told me. And he says, which of you doctors will come and do night calls? I go and do night calls for my patient. He does and goes and sees patients. He is the local doctor. And it's easy for us to throw stones at these people and say, well, they're not trained. That's true. You're right. What you're saying may be right. But if none of us are willing to go and fill those gaps, I think we have to try to see if we can at least improve. They don't practice any unsafe things. So actually, we used to dialogue with them, try to give them some ideas, because we can't change the system or fix the system overnight unless we have the better solutions. So I think it really showed why, when in poorer areas, people get addicted to many systems. Like particularly, I remember one of the issues which we came across was we used to see a lot of steroid or glucocorticoid abuse in Bihar, and we used to wonder why. A tablet of Visalone, prednisolone, or dexamethasone is so much cheaper to solve an asthmatic attack than buying an inhaler costing $400. If you go for a mixed beta 2 agonist and maybe a glucocorticoid inhaler, it comes to 300 or 400 rupees. A Dexona or a beta methasone tablet, betnesol tablet costs 2 rupees. And you will feel well if you just like pulse steroids in a different form they're giving. But patient is fine. So whenever they feel they have a joint pain or an asthma or an eczema, skin problem, they'll go and buy the betnesol from the local pharmacy. Can you blame them? That's probably a good solution for them. They are not bothered about the long term. They're living day by day. It's a hand to mouth existence for the majority of our people who live in those areas. So we really got to see economic disparity, as you rightly put it, Abhi, face to face. But then getting an insight into these behind the scene pictures helped us to be more sensitive when we looked after people, not shout at the patient, why did you go to the quack? We know this is the reason why we went to the, why did a lady in labor come at the last minute with rupture uterus? It is because she cannot decide. It is the elderly people there who may decide whether she has to go to the hospital or they are happy with the traditional diet delivering her. And I wouldn't be surprised. We used to have up to 7 eclamptics on a day in our hospital because very few of our women used to come for antenatal checkup. 80% of the women in East Champaran district, where Roxol was a part of, had never gone for a delivery to the hospital. They only very few, less than 10-20% go to any health center. No, hardly anybody has got antenatal checkups apart from a small minority. So all this shows that people have struggles financially to come to our system of medicine. It's expensive. So we need to make ways, innovative ways, how we can make it accessible and affordable for these people. And I think that's what many of our mission hospitals are also trying to do, to make poor friendly models and models which will make us accessible, available for the really desperate people. And even trying to reach out to them, because many of them will not come here to us. So those are some of my experiences when I worked there. And I will share some more thoughts as we go on. Yeah. Thanks, Abhi.
Thank you, sir.
You're
Sir,
not
so you
audible.
had taken up endocrinology. After taking up endocrinology, you decided to go back to Roxol. Sir, so can you tell us what was in your mind when you decided that? Didn't being in a tertiary care center was attractive? Wasn't that much more attractive to you than going back to a place like Roxol? How did you make a decision like that, sir?
Through my undergraduate days and in my time when I worked in Jharkhand and Assam, and especially when I did my MD general medicine training at Vellore, one of the things which I realized that I enjoyed the most, or my passion, was in teaching. So it made sense to stay in a teaching institution, because that's where everybody says you can teach and teach till you die, maybe, if you love teaching, you should enjoy doing it. And so it makes common sense to stay on in Vellore and that scene. But somehow, whenever I prayed about it, I never felt a strong tug on my heart to stay back at Vellore. And through my MD days, though, I was invited by our own faculty to stay on in Vellore, and including the endocrine faculty, they had come to know me. They had asked me to stay on in Vellore, continue to stay on and be a faculty there. somehow when I prayed about it, I never felt a strong urge to stay. I don't know why. And people used to ask, is if you love teaching and we have seen that you're good in teaching, why don't you stay in Vellore? But somehow the thought of many parts of our country, which are struggling from a lack of health facilities, that picture I'd already seen it firsthand. And I couldn't get that off my mind. It was really like almost like the Macedonian call. No, whenever I used to think about it, that thought kept on coming. Lord, how can I be available? For me, it is not only about teaching. If I don't teach in Vellore or in a good medical college, God will raise somebody else. Relatively, it's easier for people to come, but not many people are that keen to go to the other parts of our country where there aren't very many good teachers. And I said, why do I have to think of me being only a good teacher into medical students or to doctors or post MD people or DM people? I can be a good teacher to nurses, right? I can be a good teacher to an allied health specialist. I can be a good teacher to a non-medical person. My medical skills are not meant to be taught only to this. So Lord, if you I am surrendering my teaching skill also at your feet. You take it and use it. You know what is best. But I want to be available for the extension of your kingdom across our country, where the disparities are so different. And I kept praying about this. And so when I finished my MD, I was not clear whether we are ready to go to the north, and I was not even sure if I should do a specialization, super specialization. And that's the time we were about to have our first baby. And Ligia and me, we had just been married for 2 years, and we said, why don't we go to a place which is somewhere in between Vellore and maybe the mission hospitals, a place where we can take some time to think through what we should do. And that's how I didn't have a sponsorship obligation or a bond, but Ligia and me, we decided to move to the Christian Fellowship Hospital in Odanchataram as a stopgap measure for a year or so. I told Dr. Kurulavarki, I'll come there for a year. Let me just work in medicine. And my wife wanted to explore what she wanted to do her PG in. And while we were there, that 1 year became longer. It nearly became 2 years. We continued to stay on there because we really enjoyed the fellowship, the atmosphere there, meeting men and women of God who love God and who are willing to be available with us. Very simple lives. That's really struck us. And one of my classmates, Dr. Jakin, also joined us there. And we spent a good 2 years in fellowship, wondering, Lord, where would you have us go? But we knew that this is only a stopgap measure. But the time in Odanchataram was helpful to clarify things. So at that time, my wife was very clear. She wanted to do anesthesia. And it seemed unlikely once we go to the north, we'll have time to come back. So we prayed a lot. Lord, will you open a way for her to do anesthesia? She was not from CMC. So we know it's not that easy to get in. And at that time, God opened a door for her to get in for MD anesthesia in Vellore without even having to do a diploma, which was very unusual in those days, in the early 2000s. But God arranged a door beautifully, and the experience in Odanchataram was fabulous. It's almost like doing a diploma in anesthesia. And then that helped her to join in Vellore. And at that, around the same time, I was also toying between whether I should do among the various subjects. I always follow a process of exclusion. Even when I finished my MBBS, I wrote down all the 17 subjects and said, oh, one thing I definitely won't do is orthopedics. I scored it off because I didn't enjoy fixing bones, holding these limbs up, and surgery. Like that, gradually by exclusion, I came to 2 or 3 choices. Similarly, for post-MD medicine days, I think my choices boiled down between nephrology, neurology, and endocrinology. These were my 3 options based on what I feel I'm gifted in and my skill sets. And finally, when I had to decide where I will be working 10 years down the line, I asked myself, I said, if I go to a place, I should not be too demanding. Oh, I must have a cath lab, or I need to have 2 dialysis machines to work, or I cannot work. Otherwise, I'll be misfit. That is what happens sometimes when you super specialize. You specialize too much that you become unavailable for any part of India. I said, I must go to a place where my specialization should not come in the way of being a hindrance to me being available for kingdom purposes. And so endocrinology was a good mix because it was primarily medicine with a little bit of in-depth understanding. And of course, the lab is important. That is always something nowadays with outsourcing and sending samples to other places carefully, we can definitely manage. So I think it enabled me. So the choice of endocrinology was based partly on its relevance if I were to go to a secondary setup. And so when I went later on, it was not a big deal. I knew that. In fact, in my interview, I remember at Vellore for my endocrinology, they asked me, why are you doing endocrine if you're so clear you want to go into North India to a mission hospital? So I told them the thyroid problems are not uncommon. Bone disorders like osteoporosis is very common. Diabetes, even more common in India. And if I have a better understanding these 3 years, will it not help me? And in fact, that really turned out to be true. For 10 years, when I was in Bihar, we uncovered many things as I saw medical patients and I saw ICU patients, many endocrinological issues which are hidden under the surface of the vision, came out, and we were able to help people, provide them the best care possible. So it was never endocrinology which is going to decide where I'm going to practice. It was me, my commitment personally to the Christ and being available for him. And then the specialty was secondary. I think if we get that right order of perspective of why we are going and where we are going, what is our calling for our lives as a Christian, that is more important. The specialty is secondary or tertiary, I would say. It's good to have fulfillment. I enjoyed, of course, 70% of my work in Roxol was not as an endocrinologist, it was as a general physician. So that I was actually in charge of the ICU, the critical care unit, and many of the other things, being available for many other responsibilities. But I think that is very important to have in mind, weigh the costs involved, so I don't have to feel regret tomorrow. But you won't believe, I never wanted to come back from Roxol. 3 years ago, due to some family needs urgently, my son was struggling in hostel, we had to come back. But that is, now God has put me in a medical college. I'm teaching students every other day here. I am, so God knows your needs. And if you feel that you couldn't teach, God will bring it in a different way. I remember teaching students like your groups who came from Vellore, from Ludhiana. Many students from Bihar medical colleges used to visit us at Roxol. I used to teach them. Instead of teaching students in Vellore, who would have probably had hundreds of mentors available, here we were just a handful of doctors at Roxol. We used to mentor medical students from Darbhanga Medical College, Muzaffarpur Medical College, Patna Medical College, Gaya Medical College. All of them used to come in their holy holidays and in the holy break and in the Dasara Chat break, they used to come. And we used to get a lot of opportunities. Isn't that also equally valuable or more valuable in God's sight? Children who didn't have mentors, we used to teach. Then I think the best part of my time in Bihar and Roxol was mentoring these government doctors who used to come for trainings. And that was, I think, what led to a great transformation, I think, in the government sector. We could never go out to these doctors, but those people came and spent 2 weeks, and we could teach them left and right, day and night. Three batches used to come in a year, 2 to 3 batches. And those were brilliant times. So I think I've taught nursing students, nurses, allied health people. Teaching skills were still used in a different way rather than the traditional way, what we would call as teaching job. So, and today God has brought me back to a medical college, not initially something which I planned, but now I'm teaching also in the medical college. Yeah, maybe there are some delays and in fulfilling our original dreams, but God knows what is best. If you're surrendered to his hands, he will take all of it and bless it.
That was very inspiring to hear, sir, how God had like guided you and even fulfilled your dreams in ways which are very different from what the world is running after. So thank you for sharing that. One of the things which definitely you have done is doing research in a place where nobody else would have thought of. When I came to Raxol, I was very surprised to see a patient with hypokalemic periodic paralysis, and you have one of the largest series written up in a from a secondary hospital. So please tell us more about how you were, what are the research things which you had done in Raxol, and how different was it from doing research in a tertiary center or in a teaching institution?
When I went to the Duncan Hospital at Roxol, I had no plans to do any research, to be truthful. That is the last thing on my agenda. I wanted to be available to help in clinical work was the primary objective. But when we do clinical work, you come across clinical problems, and some of which didn't have very good answers in any of the contexts we worked. And for example, one of the things I used to often see was patients coming with sudden onset quadriparesis, acute onset. And these acute onset quadriparesis, we used to think of in Vellore and other big teaching institutes, could this be Guillain-Barré syndrome? That's what the first thought was. But in Roxol, there was already a back history that Dr. Santosh Matthew, who was a physician there 20 years prior to me, in the 97, 10, 15 years prior to my coming there, had already done a research work that he showed that 70% of people who come with acute onset quadriparesis had turned out to have hypokalemic periodic paralysis. And this was published in the journal called the Tropical Doctor 10 years prior to my going there. But at that time, they didn't have all the laboratory support which was needed to confirm what is the root cause of HPP. But this was a very good paper which was published, and I had already read this. And surprisingly, during my training, when I was doing DNB endocrinology in Vellore, my senior colleague who did 1 year before me, Dr. Rao, had done a in-depth workup of hypokalemic paralysis and published it from CMC Vellore just the year before I went back to Roxol. So I had got a deeper insight into this problem. So when I went to Roxol, lo and behold, it was a surprise waiting for me. I was seeing patients during the summer months, nearly about 30 to 40 patients coming with recurrent episodes of HPP, getting admitted for 2 days with potassium chloride. They're getting better, they go home. But then they'll come back after a few months again with another attack. So this is not right. I realize that we are not treating the root cause. We're just treating it symptomatically by giving potassium chloride. So we said, could we not look at this a deeper? And then I talked to my colleagues in Vellore, Dr. Nihal Thomas, Dr. Seshadri. I spoke to my senior colleague, Dr. Santosh Matthew, and said, how can we take this body of this problem and investigate it better? So at that time, one of my students was Dr. Vinod, who's now a pediatrician in Herbertpore. Dr. Vinod was wanting a project for his PG diploma in family medicine. I said, why don't we prospectively look at every patient who comes with hypokalemic paralysis? Let's do a standard set of investigations which can be done in secondary hospitals. And we made a pro forma. We got a permission from the EHA review committee. And finally, we got a study going, and we documented in a period of 2 years. We had something like, 3 years. We got 84 patients who came with acute onset quadriparesis, and all of them were worked up reasonably well. And we published this paper later on in the British journal called the Tropical Medicine, called the Tropical Doctor. And that showed that many of these patients actually had renal tubular acidosis. A few of them had Conn syndrome, where you have an aldosterone producing adenoma, and a few of them had Barter's and Gentleman syndrome, and 1 or 2 had thyrotoxicosis. But the spectrum of problems which we saw was somewhat similar to Vellore, but here we were seeing everybody there. Whereas in CMC Vellore, the negative part of the study was there's only patients who came to endocrinology. So in a tertiary care, there's a lot of selection bias of patients who come to you. Whereas here we had the whole set of patients who came. And then we worked out a simple algorithm. If any of you have time, you can Google up HPP and North Bihar. You can look at our paper. We worked out a simpler algorithm by which we can investigate these patients with less facilities. And then this news of our doing this paper spread to other mission hospitals. I remember from Baripada, from the Graham Staines Hospital, some of our friends would call up and say, oh, I have a patient like this. What can I do? So there, they didn't even have a blood gas analyzer. So what can we do there? So we could do this. So how we used to help them treat. And as a result of which, our number of HPP patients came down, because many of our patients were repeat admissions. 30% of our patients were recurrent admissions. So we brought down the number of admissions and saved a lot of money, time. And some of the HPP hypokalemic patients came with potassiums of 1 and 1.2, which could be dangerous. One of them had a ventricular arrhythmia. Fortunately, we didn't lose any patient during that time. But this is something we realized it is important to disseminate this knowledge, and we could share this information across various hospitals. And we presented in various international meetings, including the National Endocrine Society meeting in Calcutta in 2012. And our paper actually got the gold medal for the best research paper, a poster which we had put up. All I wanted to say through this is, it was not that we went there planning to do research, but when the problems came, we got arranged people. I remember I had a friend from overseas who was there as an epidemiologist. She helped me to write up the paper. I couldn't do everything on my own. It was teamwork at its best, which led to this publication. And we are so great. Even today, it's one of the largest series in the world of a large number of hypokalemic periodic paralysis, because some unique problems occur in certain parts of our country, which the metro cities and the big places may not necessarily see in such numbers. Then we did another big problem we had is we used to have about 600 admissions for snake bites every year. And snake bite admissions, majority of our snakes in our area were all neurotoxic baits. So many of them will get intubated and ventilated. And managing them every day and doing the same thing over and again didn't particularly give a great pleasure. We thought we must try to document what happens, how many of them survive, how many die. Is it all cobras or is it some of them crates? And then we actually started documenting which the snake they brought on. We learned a lot through the process. At that time, Vellore had a collaborative work with us, and they said, let's identify the snakes which come. And then we realized some of the snakes which they bought were not crates, as many people thought they were. They were evening biters. Some of them were actually the non-poisonous wolf snakes, which I'd never even heard in my medical training about wolf snakes. But we learned a lot about snakes. And my colleague, she's from Australia, she was with me. She was scared of snakes, but she's now today actually one of the best experts on snakes and the types of snakes in the northern Bihar area. And we learned about herpetology. Now you may say, what is an endocrinologist doing with snake bites? But actually, you won't believe, I've learned so much about snake bites working in Bihar. And And then we published this work actually in a few journals, which you can all Google and later on see. And we were able to bring about a lot of preventive measures to reduce the incidence of snake bites, to the extent that our snake bite work has now been included in the WHO Southeast Asia guidelines in the prevention of snake bite chapter. If you go and read the Duncan Hospital data and what work we did towards prevention of snake bites to reduce the morbidity and mortality of snake bites is now quoted in the WHO guidelines. So this is something which we would have never imagined or planned. But when you address needs and try to go a little deeper, due to the effort many other people who helped us, we were able to do some work in the area of snake bite prevention. That's the second thing. I think the third important area we worked in is we used to see a lot of people with organophosphorus poisoning. People used to come and we used to manage in our ICU. It was heart-wrenching to manage these young people who took OP poisoning. And then we realized the majority of them were suicidal attempts. We said we felt great at the end of 2 weeks, 3 weeks, the patient is off the ventilator, he goes home. Only thing is poorer by about 50,000 rupees for his bill. But the lives were saved, we were happy. But then we realized we became famous as a suicide, as an OP poisoning center in that part of Bihar. A lot of patients were coming, more people ventilated, everybody was referring to us. So our numbers of OP poisonings and suicidal attempts were going up. But we thought, is that something to be happy about? No, we said that's not happy. That's not addressing the root problem. We realized that maybe a mental health issue. And so we're right at the time wondering what can we do to explore the mental health of these people? How can we counsel them? You won't believe, suddenly we got a phone call from one of our friends in Herbertpur saying, there's a young lady from Gujarat who wants to join you as a psychologist. We never had a psychiatrist, leave alone a psychologist. Suddenly at the right time, God brought in a psychologist. And she spent a year investigating, interviewing these people, why they attempted suicide. And that became a paper later on suicide attempts in Bihar and what are the reasons behind it, family conflicts, issues. And then we could conduct a community-based program where we could try to reduce suicidal attempts in our villages around as a consequence of this particular work. So suicides, North Bihar, if you Google, I think you can see our paper, which is available on open access. So actually all the problems we faced, we just sort of thought through, spent some time, and I couldn't have done it on my own, but I had some students who were doing family medicine, some seniors who were interested in these areas, and the entire support of the hospital faculty, the administration, who supported us in this effort, gave us time to do this. That is what led to the publications in suicides, hypokalemic paralysis, and snake bites. But none of these were directly connected to endocrine. But I think the most endocrine case issue was, we saw, as I mentioned in my few minutes ago, was about steroid abuse. We actually realized that there were a lot of people who came with Addisonian crisis in the casualty. And there were people who were taking steroids on their own and suddenly stopped it due to a small fever and nobody was there to top up their steroid. Or these people had come with bad osteoporotic fractures. And we picked up in a small study done in the hospital showed there were a large number of people who were abusing steroids. And then Sharon, my colleague who was in community health, did a community-based study. And then we documented that's a huge problem in our place. And then based on that study, we were able to write in the print media and in the electronic media about steroid misuse. And we've been like advocacy done about how we need to be careful in giving steroids. And we called in many of these quacks, as you would like to call them. But these are all traditional practitioners. And we told them the dangers of steroid misuse. And so that has led to a ripple effect. And many people became aware of the problems of glucocorticoid misuse. And that became a couple of papers in the years later. So these were the four, I would say, the areas which I remember very strongly. And today, when I look back 10 years down the line, I would say, no, that is good. That's a part of our job. In Proverbs 31:8, it says, speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves. Be the voice of the oppressed. And I think this is a silent suffering group, people who are on steroids consistently and not even knowing it's dangerous, and then end up in problems and die. And we can be the voice, as that's what God wants us to be, to be voice for those who cannot speak up for themselves. And so our faith combined with our eyes to see, which normally people will not see, is very important. Not just to see our profession as, just working for some salary, but to see it as an opportunity to involve people's lives and make a difference in the time God has given you. And today, actually, you won't believe, this glucocorticoid misuse study, I just finished one study here now in Koni block of South Pathanamthitta district in Kerala. And we have now found that it's a problem here also, even though it's the most educated state in India, literate state. But here also there's a problem, of course, not to that magnitude. But now we're actually we're writing up a paper to compare the two. What happened in Bihar and now in Kerala, and what are the parallels what's happening. So it is actually just a question of spirit of inquiry which is needed to do research. Agreed, I'm not great at statistics. I hate statistics. But then God arranged a lady who came and worked with us as an overseas volunteer. She's even today helping me to write up the crunch, the numbers, look at the statistics, the chi-square test. I hate all this, but I'm grateful that God will bring in the right. If you have a heart, God will bring in the right people, and you can make an impact for kingdom purposes. That's my lesson I've learned from research.
That is very fascinating, sir. Right um, from the molecular level, going to the community, the research which you had done in Raxol was really, really fascinating. Um, Sir, like you had mentioned about the people in Bihar. If I remember right, the people in the patients used to really love you. They used to call you Phillips. Is that right? They used to call you
Yeah.
because they couldn't pronounce it right, I guess. Do you remember any of those patients, sir, who you had treated? Anyone who you fondly remember, and patients who have been benefited from your care?
I think there are about two or three patients which immediately come to my mind when I think of my days when I was able to serve God in Bihar. The first patient I remember is a Nepali lady, Juanita. I don't remember her full name now. I knew it so well till a few years ago. She was brought to me on a stretcher from a town in Nepal, which was about 3 hours away from our hospital. She was brought because she had no strength in her limbs and she was having a lot of body aches and pains. And when I looked at her, she was from the Nepali ethnicity and she had come to us. And I found that she had severe proximal myopathy. When I evaluated her, I found a potassium to be only about 2.1, very low. And she's been having this for quite a while. It's a chronic hypokalemia. And she did get episodes where it used to get worse. And she had severe proximal muscle weakness. And I used to wonder why is this? And so somebody had done a potassium outside. That's how she came to us because we were becoming well known as being an area where potassium problems we can manage well. But when we actually worked her up, we knew from our study and from the previous studies that renal tubular disorders are something which are known to cause hypokalemia, especially the distal RTAs. And so we worked her up, and I realized she had severe osteomalacia. She had RTA, which is a distal RTA, and she had a proximal RTA, and she had severe osteomalacia due to 1-alpha hydroxylase deficiency, and she had also hypokalemia. So we gave her potassium, and we put her on 1-alpha hydroxylated vitamin D3, Rocaltrol, which was available, and we also found out she was associated. She had hypothyroidism as well. Her TSH was high, and I remember this lady. We put her on thyroxine, vitamin D, and we put her on calcium, of course, along with potassium chloride syrup. And she came back to us about 1 or 2 months later walking. I remember I was so excited to see a lady who was brought on a stretcher is able to walk around, not with any surgery, anything else. Her bones, of course, we had made a clear or unifying diagnosis. It was proximal RTA causing hypokalemic paralysis with associated unconnected, but hypothyroidism was there. But her proximal myopathy improved. She could walk. She was coming, and the joy on her face when she came, I can never forget. In fact, I remember it is that particular week. I think we had junior doctors. I think Nicholas was, I think, one of my junior doctors. He's doing his DM in gastroenterology in Vellore. Nicholas or one of his colleagues presented his case. And the same week, I had a young lady who came to me with sudden loss of vision. And we looked at her ophthalmoscope with her fundus. She had optic neuritis. We gave her methylprednisolone. Her vision came back. And the third was another patient who came with hearing loss. And when we worked him up for hearing loss, we found it was a conductive loss. And he actually had hypothyroidism with gluea. So that particular week, we used to have this weekly clinical meeting modeled on the lines in Vellore, where we used to have weekly clinical meetings. We used to have catchy slogans. So our presentations were 3 presentations we had. The blind see, the deaf walk, and the lame shall walk again. Bit of the Nazarene manifesto, no, of the Lord Jesus. And actually, the blind seeing was a lady with optic neuritis who got better. In 1 week, this happened. Methylprednisolone pulses, she could see again. The deaf could hear after the thyroxine was replaced. And the lady who was brought on a stretcher could walk because God enabled us to diagnose her to have a renal tubular dysfunction, hypokalemia, and multiple metabolic causes which contributed to her proximal myopathy. And it is a very good experience I had. That is one patient. This set of patients I never forget. The second is a young girl of 15 years who came to me with florid generalized tetanus. Now, tetanus is something we hardly see in Kerala or Tamil Nadu. Of course, we do see occasionally, But in Bihar, it is not uncommon. We used to see at least one patient a month with tetanus, and many of them who have severe tetanus used to end up on a ventilator. I ventilated this girl for about 3 weeks, and she had a tracheostomy. In fact, 1 or 2 weeks down the line, the relatives left her, abandoned her, and went off. I was left with this patient. My nurses used to look after her in the ICU. She was having severe spasms, generalized spasms. We had to do tracheostomy, but by God's grace, after 4 weeks, we could decannulate her, and she became well. Her name was Seema Kumari. I remember her name very well. But then we didn't know where to send her. She had no home, no relatives. Then we asked her where you live, and we tried to find out. She was a small girl, and our watchman went all the way to her village and found out. And her parents told us he brought the parents. They thought she had died. At that time, they were surprised to hear that their daughter is alive. Yeah. So when we went to leave her in the village, the entire village had come together, and then we were so happy to present their daughter, whom they thought had died 2 weeks later. And interestingly, she was a girl who had had a tetanus toxoid shot after a small injury to her toe. But I think the tetanus toxoid, probably the cold chain was not maintained, and so that's why probably she got tetanus. But anyway, the good thing is that day in the village, we could conduct a health education program for tetanus, and entire villagers heard about how terrible a disease tetanus could be. And that is a patient definitely which comes to my mind when I think of some of the patients we've cared for. But I think the last patient which I cared for, I remember, of course, much prayer went into the care of these patients because our team used to pray for them very regularly. But I must also tell you about a near miraculous healing we had in our ICU once. We had a young girl from a different faith background whom we had cared for. And she was from a community where really women are not really allowed to speak up very much. And this girl had come to us with a bad pneumonia. She was very badly hypoxic, and she had to be on a ventilator, managed with oxygen, high doses. And when she was in high flow oxygen, suddenly the second day or third day into the treatment, she started bleeding into the endotracheal tube. She was having frank pulmonary hemorrhage, and for me that was a bad sign. And I had nothing really with me to effectively stop the bleeding. And I remember one of my colleagues, she told me, Dr. Philip, do you think we can just pray for her? We cannot do. We have very limited things we can do. We're giving her antibiotics. We're supporting her, but we're really stuck. We don't have bronchoscopy or anything to investigate this on a ventilator. But that's the time when my colleague encouraged me, and we all laid hands on her and we prayed, Lord, we have to do a miracle for her. And I must say that day after we prayed, within a few hours, her bleeding completely stopped. And after that, we could extubate her in a couple of days, and she walked home. For me, I saw answers to prayer like this not often. This is just one example I'm just sharing, but very many girls, even Seema Kumari was prayed about so much. But this girl's acute healing of pulmonary hemorrhage, which I didn't really have much hope she would survive. We saw a lot of answers to prayer. So faith and your medical skills coming in a beautiful combination, we see. That is not to say that we have not lost patients. We have lost many patients. Heart-rending stories also, I can say, but I have definitely seen God working in synergy with us when we express our faith and we are available for God in places where His children, each of these children who are in Bihar and Nepal, are precious to God. And if we can be involved in that kingdom ministry, it will make such a difference. And if some of you are listening to me, can even give us 6 months or 1 year or 2 years of your life for this purpose. You never know, God may keep you shorter or longer, but that will be a wonderful experience for you.
Thank you, sir, for those stories. Those stories were very heart touching, and thank you. And the last would be definitely there were junior doctors who worked under you who were really touched by your work and your life. Some of them are now even finished their post graduation and now are working in different parts of India. How was it working with them? How was it mentoring them, and how have they influenced you in return?
Yeah, I think one of the joys of having worked for 10 years in the hospital in EHA, in the Duncan Hospital in particular, where I worked for most of the time, was we had an opportunity to look after young doctors from various colleges in India. Most of them were not from the CMCs. Only a few were from the CMCs. Many of them were from Andhra medical colleges and from Bihar and other parts of the country. And I think we have had a chance to mentor about 20 to 25 young junior doctors, at least in a little bit closer way. And what I can look back at the time is this is an opportunity to have another 20, 25 children at different stages in our life. They were like our own children. I remember Dr. Sedevi Angami, who's in Nagaland, used to tell us, you must look after your junior doctors like your own children. What all will you do for them? Sometimes I remember very late in the night, we'll be having NEET PG preparation classes. Once I remember we used to go until very late in the night, but then the joy of pouring out all what God has given you into their lives, no? And to see them excel and succeed is also a tremendous joy. I remember almost all the 20 to 25 children who passed through our institution have gotten for post graduation in some college or the other. Most of them, of course, in Vellore. And today, the best part which I look back is I was not planning to leave Roxall, but God took me away from there and now brought me here to Kerala, much against our will. But today, all those many of the people whom we mentored are now the medical directors or senior consultants in some of our key hospitals of the Emmanuel Hospital Association. One of them is in Mukunda, who was one of my best junior doctors. He was such a faithful, honest, sincere person. He's now the orthopedician in Mukunda. I have a young person who's a pediatrician in Herbertpur Christian Hospital. He was also a brilliant young man. He had actually done the hypokalemic periodic paralysis work. The one in Mukunda had done glucocorticoid misuse work. But today, they have now passed. It's like almost I feel like I've run my relay race. I probably was the second runner or the third runner. People have run behind me, before me, the stalwarts. I say, no, somebody said, no, we are standing on the shoulders of giants so you can see better. I was able to stand on the shoulders of many giants who mentored me. Now my turn came, but I didn't expect it will finish, but my turn finished. I could pass on the baton. And now they are running the race. And they are, in fact, in charge of mentoring the next generation. So it's actually all of us are in a relay race in a sense, what I'm trying to say. And actually, I was talking to one of my junior doctors who's today one of the senior most doctors in that hospital. And he was telling me, sir, today I am mentoring young doctors. And I said, wow, that's what I want. That's a dream. None of us can do it all. We can do our job, pass on the baton, and they run with the baton for the next race and they build the next generation. And so I think if we build the next generation and pass on the same values we have learned to pour out ourselves into these young people, that will be something of a legacy worth living. It's worth it. And we can do our part of the journey, we should do it well. And so actually many of them are, some of them are in CMC Vellore, some of my juniors. And I really, it's a joy today to see them grow and flower and blossom, and they have become leaders in their own rights. And it's such a joy to actually pass on our skills, knowledge, everything to them. Because that it's for a short time God has kept us. They said, no, only one life and it will soon be gone. But only what is done for Christ will last. And so this is ways in which each of us have a unique contribution to building God's kingdom. And we should do it faithfully. Some of us may be teaching, some of us may be clinical service, some of us may be spiritual leadership, different ways God uses us. But we should be faithful to the calling He has given us. So I really look back with a lot of fulfillment and joy when I think of the mentoring of young people which has happened. It took a lot of time. We had to make some sacrifices, family time. So many things did get affected. But I must say, looking back, I have no regrets. It's something well worth it to pour out into others' lives. So all what God has given us, we have no reason to be proud of what we had. We were born in good homes. We had good education. What is it we have which is not given? We read in Corinthians, right? So why take the credit for it? Our job is to realize it's a blessing of God and we pass it on to others. Yeah, that's probably what I would say.
Thank you, sir. And so in conclusion, this is something which I always ask. I'm hoping that a junior doctor or a student is listening to you, and what would you tell them? They might be thinking, what am I planning? What am I going to do in the future? Where should I work? Which field should I take? So what would you say to such a person, sir?
I would say to a young medical student or a person who just finished his MBBS, today be faithful in what God has given you in front of you. He who is faithful in small things, God will entrust greater responsibilities in the days ahead. Today, if your job is you're studying pharmacology and pathology and microbiology, do it well. Sincerely do your best for that. And you never know, these are the foundations for your medical career in the future. Study that well, and then later on when you come to the crossroads, at that time God will show you direction. Don't sit and worry about what will happen 5 years down the line. None of us can predict 5 years down the line where we will be. I never thought 5 years ago I'll be here today, or 10 years previously I never knew today I'll be where I am. But I think God doesn't guide us with a lot of clarity about the future, but day by day He guides us. Step by step, He will guide us. But I think it's a journey is more important than the destination, is what my learning has been over the years. Every day, every year, every season of our life has got its own challenges. Today, let us be faithful in what God has given us. In your specialty, yes, God will show you. I would say it's always good after an MBBS to go to a good mission hospital where there are a few seniors who are available, who are interested in nurturing you. I know in Madhepura Mission Hospital, Dr. Arpit and his team, like that, there are many small teams in Massam, in Makunda, in Herbertpur, in Raxol, and many other mission hospitals across the country, like in Asha Kiran in Orissa. There are seniors who love to nurture and mentor. Go and spend a year or two, it will never be a loss. Dr. Sam Siddhartha told me when I was a young junior doctor in Assam, oh, should I, if I don't apply for PG immediately, you know what? The next year, the competition is getting tougher. That's what world will say. But I think for Christians and for people who follow God, when God closes a door, nobody can open it. Or when God opens a door, nobody can shut it. We are not going to compete in the rat race which the world is running in. For us, if we submit our life to God, God will open a door at the right time. We don't have to be worried about how many will compete against you. God can do with a minority, He can bring about a huge change. So I hope you got the point what I'm trying to say. When you're committed to God's work and do your job faithfully, He will open doors at the right time. He will bring in the right connections, the right people into your life who will guide you and help you along the journey. So just surrender your life to God and says, Lord, you take my plans. I know I am seeing with a myopic vision. I only see short term, but God can see the long picture ahead of us. So let's pray that He who knows the future, He will be with us along the way. So don't get too worried and get worry yourself to death about, oh, what will I do? What will I do? Just do your job faithfully, prepare for the need, write it faithfully, and pray that God will show you what is the best. And if you have an opportunity, I would say always say after MBBS, go and work for a couple of years or 1 year each at least in some good mission hospital where there are seniors to mentor you. I think that will be a great asset and investment in your life. It may change your life even 180 degrees, like my life changed after that.
Thank you, sir. It was great having this conversation with you. Thank you once again.
Thank you. Thank you, Abid, for giving me an opportunity to share my heart with you all. And I hope that if any of you want to be in touch with Abby or me, I'm sure our contact details will be with you all. Thank you so much, and God bless you all.
So thank you, everyone, and we hope to see you in the next video. Bye for now.